Hello, I'm Jon Oliver. Today I'll be discussing the role of machine learning in security. So let's look at the last 20 years of cybercrime evolution. It comes in broadly two phases. From 2000 to about 2010, what we see is the building up of technical capability. That spam mass mailers, botnets, web threats, exploit kits, technical innovations in the way they could distribute malware and use that malware. Then in phase two, we saw enhancements in the business model. The business model for a cyber criminal is how they use a malware infection or a compromised computer and turn it into money, how they monetize their malware infections. And what we saw was that ransomware arose around 2014, and in response, the security industry started using widespread use of machine learning and AI technologies. It was very effective against ransomware. Let's investigate that issue further. So let's look at the business models by cyber criminals. There's a variety of techniques. They can rent it out. They can turn a machine into a spam bot or a DDoS machine. They'll get a few dollars a month. They can commit theft. They can try and directly steal money out of your bank account. A better return. The banks are quite good at stopping that. And they have fraud detection. They'll ring you up and tell you, this is a suspicious transaction. Did you really do it? Another thing that they might do is steal intellectual property. This has a long sales cycle. So it sells for a premium when they can get a sale. Selling it in the cyber criminal undergrounds might be difficult. There's law enforcement agents trying to pose as buyers. It's a long, difficult sales cycle. And then they came across extortion, ransomware. And the early versions of ransomware were what I'd call opportunistic, but still, the price you'd get back per malware infection was for a premium. It was very good. You might get a Bitcoin. You might get a few thousand US, $1,000, a few $1,000 US. Let's look at opportunistic ransomware. Often big spam runs. We saw a lot of this 2014 to 2017, 18. This is the classic crypto locker warning message. So let's look about the changes that were brought about by ransomware and the response. So pre-ransomware, the critical problem was a false positive in the operating system. The large security companies would have that occur about once every 10 years. And reactive solutions were good enough. If you responded within 15 minutes, half an hour, even an hour, that might be fine as a security vendor. Post-ransomware, the big problem was ransomware infections, because a false positive in the operating system might occur once a decade. The large security vendors was a very rare event and would become newsworthy, potentially front page. Ransomware infections would also knock out an company or an organization, but would occur every day. Reactive solutions are simply inadequate. You need to catch a ransomware infection at the time of infection at time zero. Machine learning solutions are good at ransomware. It's got a strong signal and they offer time zero protection. They catch it at the time that the malware is deployed into the organization. So with this strong signal, we'd see ransomware being spammed out or something like that, and an ML security solution would see that strong signal and block it. So ML AI, it's a complete solution. Yeah, no, not quite. The security industry views ML and AI as a critical tool, but it's not a silver bullet. It won't solve all of our problems. So let's look at the history of great ML AI breakthroughs and see their relevance to the cybersecurity industry. A lot of them occur within the area of gameplay, because that's where you can measure how our AI stacks against the cleverest people. So IBM had two great breakthroughs. In 1998, it had Deep Blue. It was a chess computer that could beat the very best chess professionals. And in 2011, they released IBM Watson that could beat the best human champions at the quiz game of Jeopardy. It's an open-ended game. You'd get a question, well, you'd get an answer actually, at a twist, and you had to get the question. Could be about any area of general knowledge. And Watson was very good at this task and beat the best champions from the game of Jeopardy. 2016, what was considered another breakthrough. Go was considered an extraordinarily hard game for machine learning computers, and AlphaGo was able to beat the best Go professionals. Then a bit of a surprise in 2017, we saw that poker, two-handed Texas Hold'em poker, there's not many cards in play. There's 5 in the middle, 2 in each hand, total of 9 cards. And it wasn't until 2017 Libratus was able to beat the best human professionals at two-handed poker, Texas Hold'em. 2 years later, Microsoft had a program for beating the best professionals at Mahjong. So it's very interesting, the games with lack of knowledge, where you don't see all the pieces, you don't know the exact situation, were more difficult than very, very complex situations in chess and Go. This is a summary of those breakthroughs. And, well, we note 2 things: a lack of knowledge, and so computer security has a lot of that, is quite a hard task for machine learning and AI breakthroughs, but also computer security has elements of all of those games, all of those adversarial situations. It requires complex strategy, many different rules, and Linux is very different than Windows. Each device is different, completely open-ended, complex, lack of knowledge, multiple actors. Security has it all. So we don't expect machine learning AI to have the breakthroughs and completely solve computer security. What we expect is that it's a key asset to have it in your security toolbox. So let's look at attacking, evading machine learning and AI. So there's been research on that. So let's look at tricking ML. So we have 3 photos on the left: a speaker, an insect, a dog. And machine learning AI can be trained from big databases of images to identify it's a speaker, an insect, a dog. But then it can also be trained, and another system, an adversarial machine learning system, can be trained to apply the transformation in the middle, the funny pixelated gray images. That's a transformation to the images on the right. Humans will say they're a speaker, an insect, and a dog. We can't see a difference. The machine learning views them all as ostriches. It was trained by the adversarial machine learning, and those new images were created that tricked the original machine learning and misclassified them all. So the question, can this be applied to computer security and the machine learning AI in computer security? Yes, it can. Indeed, it has been. It was tested. These techniques work. machine learning in security can be tricked. More than can be, was tricked. So this would bring into question the potential for machine learning solutions, again, being very effective against ransomware. Could they, the cyber criminals, have applied these techniques and tricked the machine learning into misclassifying it? In this picture, showing it, misclassifying it as an ostrich, well, misclassifying it as goodware. Well, did the cyber criminals do this? Not quite. But they did something equivalent. They did intrusion-based ransomware. Down the bottom row, we've put in a new business model. And this was developed in the 2017-18, 2019-20, it's become quite common. So the total amount of ransomware in that later few years has gone down, but the impact of that ransomware has gone up. And that's because they've been more systematic about who they break into, and they're demanding larger ransoms because they know who they're breaking into. There's been various reports this year about the profitability of this intrusion-based ransomware. The key thing is you've broken in, you can encrypt the key assets, sometimes also involved with an element of blackmail where you threaten to expose the secret files. And since you've been able to get in there, you know who you're talking to, you know you've got key assets, you demand a premium. So ransomware sums have been in the 5- and 6-figure sum, which would not be at all typical for opportunistic ransomware based upon spam. Let's look at the phases of intrusion-based ransomware. This is using RDP credentials. There are other variants on this. This gives you an example. So in step 1, you might brute force an RDP, get the credentials, and then you sell them on a cyber criminal underground. So this is an example of a cyber criminal underground forum where they have RDP credentials for sale. You know which country, you know elements of what you're buying when you purchase these credentials. You can then use these credentials in phase 2. You purchase them, you break in, and then you might turn off the security solution. You might require to do privilege escalation. You might use vulnerabilities like the zero login, or you might use administrative tools to encrypt the files. There's a variety of ways that dodge the machine learning that might catch your ransomware. Well, you might not even use ransomware if you use administrative tools to encrypt the files. And machine learning does not work if somebody turns it off. So be aware of that this approach has been adopted by quite a few ransomware groups. This is typical advice for these ransomware attacks that are intrusion-based. This has recently come out. There's been very large attacks in the US on the health sector by the Ryuk group that uses this intrusion-based ransomware methodology. And this is typical of the advice that you'll see from multiple security researchers and vendors. Please look at this and interpret it in the light of what I've described in this session. So let's look at specifics of this advice because I'm going to summarize it. The first item just says, make sure you've got proper security products. But then, interestingly, the second item, make sure it has self-protection. Self-protection is a traditional security element, dates back quite a long time, in mature security products, that the security product knows how to stop somebody just turning it off, and that it tries to make sure that it stays turned on unless it's turned off in the appropriate way by an administrative who has the correct methodology and approach for turning it off. So you don't want just an intruder or compromised machine being able to turn off the security solutions. You need patching and virtual patching solutions. That's to stop elements of the intrusion that might use vulnerabilities, like zero logon. So there, you either need to patch your solutions or you need a virtual patching. That is something that looks for those attempts of exploiting vulnerabilities and breaking in further lateral movement, elements like that. So that's traditional security to make sure your sophisticated advanced techniques can operate. You further need to restrict PowerShell and administrative shares. They're two tricks where administrative tools were used to encrypt files, to implement key elements of the ransomware attack. So that's another thing you need to look at doing. And the last item, obviously, backup. We've all got to make sure we have backups off in a separate secure locations so that we can restore if worst comes to the worst. So let's conclude. ML and AI is a great addition to the security toolset. It's not a silver bullet. It will be attacked and evaded. And that is actively going on today. And we saw it in the riot group. We said in Dharma, Crisis, there is quite a range of ransomware attackers who are aware of the various tool sets that will stop them, and they make sure they attack and evade them. In actual fact, other groups have been reported that they're moving to the ransomware model. Intrusion-based ransomware business model is considered attractive. And some top-notch cyber criminals who have a history and skill are moving to that model this year. In addition to that, machine learning solutions should be used because it's a great addition to the security toolset, very powerful at catching those elements of ransomware, has a strong signal that the machine learning can pick up and safely detect, but it needs to be carefully combined. Layered in with traditional security, you want some protection, you need intrusion prevention, you need that virtual patching, you also need to be doing patching, and you need to restrict your administrative tools, that your policies, your administrative network shares, you need to look at restricting files which have network access to being read-only if they're a few months old, things like that. Let's look at the policies around our digital assets and the administrative tools and their privileges. So thank you for having me here today, and hope you have a wonderful CloudSec.